Welcome to Date with Desk Club, our online orientation that will take up about the next hour. It's lovely to have you, and folks who are here are putting into the chat their names, their pronouns, their setting, and their location. This is what our agenda is for the next hour. I hope you are experiencing a wide welcome. I'm thrilled that you are here, and I'll tell you a little bit about me, and you all are already doing your introductions to each other. I want to share with you a video to set the appropriate tone for how Date with Death Club approaches mortality. Then I'll do an overview of the curriculum, which will include philosophical approaches and recognizing that it is a work in progress and a work in process. And we'll go over the slides that I have created for the first session, just so you can get a sense of that. We won't be doing the session itself, but we will go over that and I'll talk a little bit about available support if you are planning on doing a Date with Death Club. And then there will be time for questions and answers. So let me just say that my name is Karen G. Johnston. I am an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. I have a Master's of Divinity, but I also have a MSW, a Master's of Social Work. I did that for 20 years before I became a minister. And I think both of those things, as well as my training as a death doula it come to bear, as well as my spiritual practice of befriending death. I swim not only in Unitarian Universalism, but in a stream of Buddhism, and that is a big piece of my world. And I think all of those came together and collided into being available to the universe, frankly. I really believe, because of the way that this curriculum came into being, that I became a vehicle for it, that rather than my actually having written it. So, let me set the proper tone. I'm going to show you a video.
You know, once you get past 73, those funerals come too frequently, so pricey, and no personality. So I thought, what's the point of living a life that's colourful and bold, and then you're told this is how your exit's going to be? Boring. She said,
what do you do when the music stops, when you're on the way up, but there's mounting costs, all for the price of a stupid wooden box? Forget about the rub. You start yourself a club, a place to share and sing your song. It's the final verse, but life goes on. So we started a club to make coffins of our own and save some cash and my house grow.
There's a workshop
and a place to make the tea.
This is where we get to play and make a splash on our final day. Forget the gold and mahogany.
I'm going down with Elders.
Mine is currently used as a sofa bed. Here's my glory box.
It's more than a club, it's our community. Forget about the rub. We build a box with love, a resting place to sing your song. It's the final verse, but life goes on.
But not everyone was thrilled we were making lovely, affordable coffins. In fact, we managed to ruffle some feathers.
Just a minute, you are causing us dismay, stealing our clients, taking business away.
But we won them over in the end, and they just couldn't help but love us. And we just got bigger and better. We we've removed the mystique.
We've got the control. Because face it, a funeral's got to have soul.
We never knew how awesome death could be. Forget about the rub. You build a box with love, love. A resting place to sing your song. It's the final verse, but life goes on.
Now clubs are springing up all over the place.
Forget about the rub. You build a box with love, love. A resting place to sing your song. It's the final verse, but life goes on.
So that video is in the first session of this multi-session curriculum as a way to recognize that we may be talking about something that's serious and may, in fact, have rise in us fear or anxiety, worries, something where we want to avoid it. But this is hopefully a welcoming way to say we can also take this serious thing not so seriously, or at least ourselves, as we engage in a community exploration of mortality. So I'm going to give you an overview of the history of the curriculum, its philosophy. I'm going to talk to you about the very intentional pedagogic container that helps create the space to allow for safer, braver exploration of mortality, go over the topics that exist right now and other ways to be able to kind of work the sessions outside of kind of the typical way. In 2021, I had a 3-month sabbatical from the congregation I serve. And at the beginning of it, I created a 12-day solo meditation retreat. This is in high pandemic season. And so I couldn't do it with other folks, but I knew that my focus would be on my befriending death practice. And so I journaled and I read and I listened to Buddhist Dharma talks, and I did the corpse contemplation and a whole lot of things. And that's what I thought I was doing. But the universe had plans for me. And early on, almost wholesale, the outline and the idea for Date with Death Club came. And luckily, this meditation retreat was at the beginning of those 3 months. And I was able to use the rest of my time on sabbatical to write a big chunk, most of the curriculum. And that was unexpected, but a great gift. And so last year, using my collegial networks and Unitarian Universalist ministers, I was able to create a pilot year with the help of many of them. And so in 7 different sites last year, from September 21 to June of 22, there were 7 sites that ran a version of Date with Death Club and provided feedback, which I then this summer used to revise the curriculum before it became released on August 15th and available for public consumption. Those 7 sites included 5 houses of worship, all Unitarian Universalist congregations. One was an online version for Unitarian Universalists, but it was on Eventbrite. So we ended up with people, frankly, from all over the world and who weren't necessarily Unitarian Universalists. And then also one at a public library, because as I talk about it, you'll hear this is a secular curriculum. It's a non-dogmatic curriculum, and it's designed for public libraries, for senior centers, for community centers, for neighbors who want to get together and have this conversation. And for liberal religious houses of worship, they could also vibe with this as well. But it's really set up to have a much wider span than where I find my professional calling to be. So the philosophy is that it starts as secular, but I'm also going to talk to you about the safer, braver space that we try to create. We'll talk about the flexibility, how it focuses on inclusivity and is justice affirming, how it really focuses on participants' self-reflection and self-discernment, as well as growing community. So some of you have already imagined beyond this list where you might be able to bring this. It could be a multi-faith community effort. It could be among a certain group of folks. My hope is that you will bring it where you think it needs to be, and we'll see how that works. And if you'll be doing the tweaks, and hopefully you'll let me know what would be helpful to know about that. But key piece is that it really is set up as a secular curriculum. Though if you are Unitarian Universalist and that's your setting, there are some pieces in the curriculum, an appendix in particular, that or several appendices that help you adapt it to a Unitarian Universalist setting. So we're trying to create, with Date with Death Club, a safer, braver space, both to engage the conversation about mortality, which can be tender for so many of us. It's taboo in so many places. And so the way that I've approached that is to create a container that is recreated in every session. And that means that there's intentionality in how we open each session, and there's intentionality in how we close each session. And in between that, then there's the work that whatever the topic is that you're covering is there. But the opening has pretty, commonplace, obvious content, like a welcome and housekeeping, making sure if you're meeting in person, people know where the restrooms are and the emergency exits. But also involves making sure there's a group agreement about how to be with each other. In Unitarian Universalist settings, you will covenant rather than group agreement. But this is really important because it really sets the tone for saying you're here for your own learning and sharing for sure, but you're not here to fix, advise, save, or correct someone else. We use Parker Palmer's, some of his work from Circles of Trust to really ground us, but you'll also have to figure out, what are you going to do? Is it a confidential space? You also will want to figure out how to deal with someone doesn't intend harm, but the impact of something that gets said or omitted might cause harm. How will you as a group handle that? And I found it also really important to get the group to agree with, what do we do should someone leave in distress? That did not happen in my awareness in any of the 7 pilot sites. I know as a facilitator, I was more confident facilitating if we had a common understanding of what would happen if somebody left in distress. It let me let go of that. And typically what we came up with in the 2 that I facilitated, which is, if I notice you leave, I will do my best to reach out to you, but also if you leave, please reach back out to me, right? And then that lets everyone know that we all share some mutual responsibility for that. Of course, the opening begins with an agenda to letting folks know what you're doing. And then there's a connection exercise, because this really is meant to be explore in community. And so the connection exercise sometimes is tailored specifically to that topic. And sometimes it's just a chance to get folks talking to each other. Some of the people, let's say it's session 5, you're doing it once a month at session 5. There might be new people who come in just because they're attracted to that session. And there might be people who've been coming along and they already have a connection. There's an appendix with suggestions for connection exercises that you can do. Some of them are super silly. And like I said, some of them actually help you begin to do the work of the content. You're already moving in there. At the end of the session, and this is why sessions are actually long, I recommend 2.5 hours, is because you're spending 20 or so minutes doing the closing. And it's a summary circle, a margin center reflection, which I'll talk about in depth later, gratitude, takeaway, what's next, and every session ends with a joke of the day. If we're going to start the whole series off with that lovely musical, then also we need to pay attention to how are folks doing. The joke of the day is a real groaner. You can choose your own, but I do have an appendix of really bad good jokes or good bad jokes that you can use for your joke of the day, and they're all related to death. The summary circle is a chance for the whole group to actually come together, not quiz, not like you're quizzing them, but to say, what did we just learn? It doesn't have to be in chronological order, but it's kind of like going through what stuck out and really caught people's attention. It's a great way for, as a facilitator, to know what didn't make a mark and what did. Gratitude is a place where you encourage participants to express gratitude to each other. the inclination tends to be to thank the facilitator, and that's lovely, but at some point, you really want folks to say, you know, that thing that you said, I was really thankful because it touched a part in me, or I really appreciate that the curriculum covered this. And you know, there's a learning curve there, but after the second or third session, people really enjoy the fact of connecting through gratitude with each other. New since the pilot is the takeaway, which is offering a chance for people to say out loud in the group one of three things: something that they want to remember from the session, something that they're hoping to share with someone else that they learned in the session, or an action that they plan to take. They can keep it to themselves, people can pass, but it kind of consolidates their learning. And then, like I said, the joke of the day. The philosophy behind Date with Death Club is to be as flexible as possible. There are now 14 sessions that there's a new session on aging that hasn't been piloted, is now part of in the curriculum. And they're set up to mix and match. You, as the facilitator, can look at the session topics and go, I'm comfortable facilitating these, but I'm not so comfortable with these. And so this is what I'm going to start with, or this is where I'm always going to be. So you could choose in that way. You could choose to do this once and one session and do nothing else, or you can choose to do a year every other week. That could be a lot. Most people do it once a month in the pilot. That's how it worked, and that allows fit into people's schedules, I think, a little bit better, and also time for the content to go. One of the suggestions that came out of the pilot for houses of worship is the idea that 14 sessions is too much to do in 1 year, and because they're divided into two categories, is to do one category 1 year, the other category the next year, and to have a 2-year cycle. The two categories are philosophical spiritual topics, and then the other one is informational logistical topics. The flexibility here around mix and match is also for participants. Unless you decide to hold it as a closed group where people have to sign up ahead of time and commit to attending however long your series is. It's set up so that participants can choose one, some, or all the sessions. That they stand alone on their own enough that someone can go, oh, I really want to learn about medical aid in dying, but those other things don't really interest me. Flexibility for participants and facilitators. You can also bring the list to your group and say, what from this do you want to learn, right? What's interesting here? There are 2 documents that are the curricula. It's the same content, but one is for if you're facilitating online and one is if you're facilitating in person. So if you've got 2 documents, that's why you don't have to worry about that there's something in one of them that's not in the other. You might want to think about, rather than once a month or as part of the once a month series, you can combine sessions into a half day or a full day, or even a weekend that focuses on this. You know, make sure you have time off and all of that. I did do 2 sessions in a row on a Saturday online, so 5 hours with a lunch break. That seemed to work out okay. Like I said, monthly or every other week, this is too much to do on a weekly basis. And if you're doing it quarterly, that's fine, but one of the things you lose is the attention to trying to connect people with each other. That's just too infrequent. In terms of the philosophy of a wide welcome, there is information to prep facilitators, but also to prep facilitators in order to share it with participants about how to use the work of C.B. Beale around preemptive radical inclusion. Using that as a way to understand our approach is to aim for, to aspire, to welcome everybody in the room, to assume that they are already there and always there. We are always there. And so ideally that is anticipating needs before they're made known and felt. Can't do this, there's no perfection here. But if that's kind of where we aspire to, that means that we can really ask for folks to make a welcome space for all pronoun identities, that we make a welcome space for all bodies, especially if you're meeting in person, but even if you are meeting online. And that we aim to make sure that voices that are often marginalized, experiences that are often marginalized, that we place those closer to the center, in the center, as much as we possibly can. towards that end, and so that it's not just the facilitator that is holding this value, that it becomes a value of everyone who's taking part, is that at the end of each session, as part of that container, is that we have a margin center reflection that uses the preemptive radical inclusion concept as a way to look at what we just did, the past 2 hours that we spent together in the session. How did we do in terms of full inclusion? Who's missing here? And what would it be like if they had been present? How would we have changed? So this can be something like, well, when we were talking about funeral options, we didn't even think about who can afford and who can't afford. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, that video, it used binary language. That wasn't good for any of us. So let's pay, at least we're going to name it. And maybe that means change, or maybe it just means role modeling, certainly as a facilitator, non-defensive response to it, and welcoming, oh yeah, we can do better. A lot of the content in the sessions tries very hard to bring to the center marginalized experiences. So when we talk about what it makes a good life and a good death, we can't actually talk about a good death unless we're talking about full access to a good life. So that we talk about racial disparities when it comes to those things. When we talk about hospice, before it's set up as to have a guest come in, and maybe you're a hospice chaplain, you don't need to have a guest speaker, but before they get to speak, we talk about the disparities in use of hospice and where do they fall when it comes to religious traditions or racial and ethnic uses of that. So we really say this is one of the ways that we learn about things from the get-go. This, the very first session I had at the public library, which I love doing, it was never knew who was going to be there. There was no registration ahead of time. This guy came in, and in the middle, before the break, he's like, this is not for me. I was expecting an intellectual conversation. I was like, okay, bye. That's fine. This is not going to be for everyone. But part of what it does ask folks is for self-reflection, to take in the information and figure out what it means for you. So every session has a self-reflection activity, and that we try to approach it as journaling, but not just writing. And this is, again, one of the ways that we do a wide welcome. Not everybody writes to process their things. So can there be drawing? Is that part of what you're actively, explicitly saying? Is it keyboarding? Is it somebody speaking into their device as a way for them to make sense of what it is that they've just engaged? And as I mentioned before, there's that takeaway. So they do these reflections, conversations in small groups or in large groups. And then at the end, there's a chance to consolidate that in their journal or wherever it is that they're taking notes. For my in-person Date with Death Club, I did provide journals that I created so that folks had a dedicated one. If you're not providing that, that's fine, but I encourage you to ask folks to have a dedicated space. I have stickers with the Date with Death Club logo on it. So if that's something you want and you could just put it on a blank journal, I'm happy to send some of those to you. That's what I do. And it's for folks who have funds, it's relatively affordable and a nice kind of way to make special. The group agreements are part of how we make sure that this conversation is not a bunch of individuals saying what they think, but being in community. And like I said, the basis that I encourage that group agreement and covenanting is to start with Parker Palmer's work that says no saving, no advising, no fixing, no correcting each other. But for those folks who end up going deeper with covenanting, I encourage work from Adrienne Marie Brown and from Margaret Wheatley. And so here you can see the covenant that came out of the online group that I ran. I talked to you about those two categories that the different sessions that emerged fell into. So there's 8 in the philosophical spiritual, and there's 6 in the informational logistical. And the curriculum has more description about what each of these contains. There are 3 sessions that invite you to have guest speakers. If you, as a facilitator, have the skill set to meet the needs of the topic, then don't worry about it. So there's one on hospice where you can invite a local hospice chaplain or somebody via Zoom to join you. medical aid in dying. And I encourage folks to explore this, whether that's legal in your jurisdiction or not. And then there's a session called Afterlife, Afterlives, where there is suggested to be a panel of different folks who would be able to speak to their religious traditions, what they envision happens after death. That's not an easy thing to put together, even if you are a clergy person who has strong ties in the interfaith world. So one of the things that came out of the pilot is Reverend Claire Petersberger, who serves a Unitarian Universalist congregation in Maryland. She came up with a creative solution, and it's in the curriculum that you have, which is she found a bunch of content on YouTube that spoke to different traditions. And so the curriculum now has this as the alternative way of not having a panel of live people. You miss out on the Q&A, but you actually might be able to do this session, because I do think the way the session is imagined is ambitious and not easy to make. You can do a field trip. Maybe there's a nearby crematorium that would allow you and your group to visit. The groups I led, we had a field trip to a local green burial preserve. Actually, we drove mostly 2 hours, although one person came from out of state to join us. And that was just a joy. We had it towards the end of the series, and it was also a nice way to come together. You'll see an appendix in the curriculum that talks about what Date with Death Club is and isn't. It's envisioned for adults, although I think high schoolers can take part in it, but not younger. It's not developmentally appropriate for younger kids, though. One day, I'd love to do a small version for kids. It uses as much science and research as I could muster to inform the information. It uses humor, and it really enacts. Spirituality can come up because we're talking about death and mortality. Either participants bring it up, or it comes up through the content, and it really attempts to honor multiple perspectives. It is not a grief group. And this is, I think, where it can be the most tender place, that there will be people who might be drawn to it who are in active grief. One person asked, is there a screening tool that I recommend so that you can figure out and help somebody decide that? I don't have that. That might be, Date with Death Club 3.0. I do think it's important to have conversations with people if you're able to. If you're running one at a public library, you may not be able to do that because there might or might not be registration. But as a facilitator, ultimately, your job is to make sure that the space, even if one person has a need, that it doesn't interrupt the groups being able to engage the session. And that is where strong facilitation skills will come in handy about how to help someone imagine that later might be a better time than now, because it can be activating. It's not a death cafe, which invites the world, the public, to come and talk about anything without a topic, right? This is very topic driven. So that's one of the ways you can think about it. It's different than a death cafe. It's different than death over dinner. And both of these are described in the first session. It's different from death over dinner because death over dinner asks you to invite generally your family, your beloved, your chosen circle, home to dinner and talking about usually end of life expectations. It's smaller, but it's also like your people. This is the Date with Death Club might be just, anyone within a certain community, or it might be open to the community. I've sent out a couple of different copies because I found too many typos. There are even more typos in there, right? I am doing this on top of being a solo minister in a congregation. I love it, and it just means that it is full of typos. You don't have to tell me about the typos. I will find them. But if you see an egregious error, misinformation, I would love to know about it. And that's where, if there are any inconsistencies, we tried to get rid of them, but they might be there. And again, feel free to tell me. All the links in the documents were live as of August 15th, which means on August 16th, one of them probably died. So you're welcome to tell me about that too, but I won't be doing annual revision. I have been leading workshops and developing workshops for a long time. I don't know, 20 years, longer than that. And so I am a PowerPoint baby. I like to think that I make really excellent PowerPoints. I don't abide by all the rules, like there's far too many words on this one. If it's possible to do Date with Death Club without using slides, I encourage you to do that, but I don't know how to do that personally. You can make your own slides, but you can also buy ones that I have made. They're available for sale. But I just want to be clear, there are some folks who have no funds for this, so you make your own. That's great. If you do buy mine,